Hello, everyone. My name is Khanh Nguyen Nalpas, and I am very happy to have this conversation about ethics in qualitative research at SQIP in 2022. I'm a PhD candidate in the Critical Social and Personality Psychology program at the Graduate Center at City University of New York. And I'm excited to have this conversation. And part of why I really, think that this conversation is critical is I myself am a former child refugee, and a lot of my research is involving refugees. And the thing is that though I'm very sensitive to the fact that in some ways I am considered an insider to a refugee community, if we can even say that there is one community, it's extremely vast. At the same time, I also feel as an outsider because there are millions of refugees in the world and an incredibly diverse population. And so I have, no intention of being able to even think that I could speak to all refugee experience or even be able to be wholly aware of the incredible complexities that exist. And so for those reasons, I feel in some ways I'm an insider, which gives me a little bit of relief in approaching work with refugees. But at the same time, I do feel in some ways an outsider because of my own experiences. And so because of that, this work that I am engaged in requires an incredibly detailed attention to ethics around research, and especially research involving any possibly marginalized populations. And when we are really thinking about and speaking about ethics, I think of scenarios that are well beyond any IRB. There are codes of conduct that are procedural in nature, and ethics needs to be much more expansive than any institutional review board could potentially, anticipate. And ethics really should involve a level of care and respect for the well-being of the person, the human being, in fact, that is granting us this incredible honor of sharing their stories. And sometimes those stories are of extremely sensitive topics that can be very heavy to bear for the person being interviewed, as well as the person actually interviewing. And the process itself is an extremely relational experience. It very much depends on who is being interviewed and who is doing the interviewing. It very much depends on the connection that they have and what entry point they might take. And of course, that's, would be one of many possible entry points in learning about a human being's experience. And so this attention to ethics is really critical to avoid what Thomas Teo really calls epistemological violence. And researchers obviously do go through rigorous and intense training, but that intense training is really not enough. It's not adequate to prevent all of our biases from surfacing and shaping the research process along the way. And if we're not attentive to our biases and our positionality, this can lead to us misinterpreting the data that we have and then disseminating false knowledge that can actually lead to inadvertently harming the communities in which we're working. And this is what Thomas Teo has actually called, epistemological violence. And sadly, the legacy, the field of psychology has a very long legacy of perpetuating harm for lots of different communities. And so one of the key ways to address ethics in research is to engage in a process of reflexivity. And so the reflexive researcher, doesn't just report the facts, right, of a particular case, the quote unquote facts. The researcher also actively constructs interpretations and asks themselves, what is it that I do know? What do I know? And also at the same time questioning how they have come to, gather that in or develop those interpretations? How do I know what it is that I know? And also more exciting questions, I think, is what do I don't want to know? What is it that I don't want to know? Those are also really extremely interesting questions. But reflexivity is, in research is not a single or even, universal entity. It's a process. Gilliman and Gillum actually write that it is an active, ongoing process that saturates every stage of the research. And so at every step, from the project design of, or even asking yourself, like, what is it that I would like to learn in this research project? Who am I going to be speaking to? What types of questions will I ask? What methods will I use? Then really engaging with interrogating when we're engaged in the gathering and collecting phase. How am I engaged in that interview process? What am I listening for? Am I really listening? Am I really present with this person? And what kind of stories are emerging, and how am I reacting to those stories that are being shared? What am I learning that I don't, or that I feel uncomfortable learning? And what are the points that may be shocking or emotionally triggering? Or what are the points that I'm really trying to even avoid? These are all really important questions to ask. And these are all, questions that we have to sort of interrogate at every single stage of the research process, in order to, do the best that we can to avoid any inadvertent harm done. And we do that at each stage, and it is really, I think it can be overwhelming at times, because there's just so much to hold on to at the same time. But at the same time, it's really important that we do that. In thinking about how we make interpretations of our data along the way, and even the way that I even say data, usually I say stories shared, because there's something about how we're treating the stories that are shared to us in a way that is sacred, and honoring that story instead of just engaging with it as, oh, this is my data that I'm going to be extractive about and use for analysis. But in that interrogation process is really acknowledging that we as human beings are extremely complex ourselves. We have these emotional aspects. We have the physiological, aspects of our presence, the mental aspects. And at the same time, we also have our social aspects of who we are. And all of these actually influence how we are interpreting and understanding the stories that are being shared with us. And not only that, all of that is actually embedded within and interacting with macro level forces. And so then we also have to think about the historical moment in which I myself as a human being am embedded within, as well as the culture, as well as the social ideas and the political aspects of my own personal context, and the economic forces. All of these are also shaping me as an individual researcher, and how I am interpreting any data or stories that are being shared with me. And so this reflexivity, is a very, I think, deep process that has to, take place over the entire span of the project. And it also has to be consistent, and it also has to be, really taken with a level of courage and facing parts of ourselves and parts of our histories and parts of our experiences, and also our outside political, economic, cultural context that we may not want to really recognize is operating in the moment. But being really sensitive to the fact that we're still being shaped by these forces. And in order to do that, these are some of the questions just to start the process of really sitting with ourselves and asking, you know, for what purpose? What is the purpose of the work that I'm doing? What is it that I hope to achieve? And with whom and for whom? Who am I doing this work for? Am I doing this to further my career, or am I doing this to contribute to a larger community in some way? And how will I do this work in a way that really honors the very sacred experience and sacred stories that are shared with me? And to be really mindful of also, how is this knowledge going to be used, you know, afterwards? And these are all really important questions to ask, and there are a million more. But I am really excited to engage in this conversation at SQIP about ethics in qualitative research. Thank you.